Number 10. Grafted plants. Imagine walking through a medieval village and spotting a tree growing both apples and pears. Same tree, two different fruits. To us, that's a cool gardening trick. To your medieval neighbor, that is straight up demonic. Farmers discovered grafting. Cut a branch from one tree, attach it to another, and they fuse. The branch keeps growing, pulling nutrients from its new host. But to people in the 1400s, this was forcing nature to do something unnatural. God made apple trees for apples and pear trees for pears. Combining them was telling God he got it wrong. The person doing it must be channeling dark power. How else would they know this was possible? The knowledge itself was suspect. Now grafting is how almost every fruit you eat is grown. Your apples, your grapes for wine, it's used in virtually every commercial orchard on the planet. The thing that would have gotten you burned at the stake is now just basic agriculture. Number 9. Spices. Imagine a medieval peasant's diet. Boiled meat and brown mush every single day. Then a merchant shows up with a tiny pouch of brown powder. He sprinkles it on your food, and suddenly your brown mush tastes like something worth living for. You would absolutely think that man was a wizard. That powder was nutmeg. Back then, no one in Europe knew where it came from. It arrived from unknown lands, carried by strangers in tiny pouches. No one had seen the tree it grew on. Large amounts of nutmeg are also hallucinogenic. It makes your heart race. You see things. With no scientific explanation, the only conclusion was enchantment. Pepper had a similar reputation. It was so rare it was used as currency. People paid rent and settled debts with it. Cinnamon was even more mysterious. To protect their supply routes, traders told Europeans it was harvested from giant bird nests on unclimbable cliffs, and people believed it for centuries. Because when something makes your food taste magical, and no one can explain it, witchcraft is a reasonable guess. Number 8. Popcorn. Imagine you're a 16th century farmer who's never seen popcorn. Someone tosses a tiny rock-hard kernel into a fire. Instead of burning, it explodes into a fluffy, amazing-smelling white cloud. You would lose your mind. Imagine someone handed you a pebble today, threw it in a fire, and it turned into a marshmallow. That's what popcorn looked like to people seeing it for the first time. Naturally, people assumed something supernatural was happening inside that kernel. Some Native American tribes believed a spirit lived inside each kernel. When the kernel got hot, the spirit got angry, and the explosion was the spirit bursting out, which is a more interesting explanation than steam pressure and starch. The kernel doesn't just change shape, it gets 40 to 50 times bigger. That's like throwing a grape into a fire and pulling out a grapefruit. Early Europeans had no framework for this. No science class, no internet, just a tiny hard thing instantly becoming a giant soft thing. Pure, unexplainable magic. Number 7. The printing press. Imagine living in the 1400s. Every book you've ever seen was handwritten by a monk over months. Then one day, someone walks into your town with hundreds of identical Bibles. Every page, every letter, perfectly identical. When Gutenberg's printing press arrived around 1450, people couldn't explain it. A human hand can't write the same letter perfectly twice, let alone thousands of times. But these printed pages were flawless. To regular people in the 1400s, that was not a machine. That was the devil. Gutenberg's partner, Johann Fust, was accused of witchcraft in Paris for selling printed Bibles. The authorities believed they were conjured by dark magic, a deal with the devil to produce Bibles faster than God intended. A man was almost arrested for selling Bibles because the Bibles were too perfect. The church was terrified for another reason. It lost its control over information. Before, you had to ask a priest what the Bible said. The press changed that overnight. Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in 1517. Within months, printed copies had spread across Europe. The church called it witchcraft. What they actually meant was they had lost control, and they were right. Number 6. Dolls. A child's toy, or a long-distance torture device. Depends on who you ask. You make a small figure that looks like someone you hate. You stick a pin in its leg, and somewhere across town, your enemy suddenly grabs their leg in pain. These were called poppets, and people took them very seriously. Cultures from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe looked at a small human-shaped object and thought it could be used to hurt someone. The idea was a spiritual connection. What you did to the doll happened to the person. A pin in the heart caused chest pains. Burying it made the person waste away. Poppets weren't just for hurting people. They were used for control, to make someone fall in love with you or do your bidding. During the Salem witch trials, Bridget Bishop was found with poppets, rag dolls with pins, in her walls. This was a death sentence in 1692. She was the first person executed in Salem, all over dolls in a wall. Modern science found something uncomfortable: the nocebo effect. If you believe a poppet is being used against you, your brain can actually create the pain. It's the evil twin of the placebo effect. So the witchcraft wasn't in the doll, it was in the belief, which is somehow both less scary and way more scary.